I think we'll proceed to the management part now. Okay. So Ankita,
Yes.
Tell me the relevant,
Yes,
so we are going to consider now the surgical management for this child, right? It's a 10-year-old child with congenital ptosis, and apparently the child is having no apparent levator function. So how much again is the degree of ptosis and how much is the levator excursion from the history which was given to you?
Ma'am, it is levator excursion is 4 mm bilaterally, and the degree of ptosis is severe, bilateral 4 mm.
Okay, so how do you grade that levator function?
Ma'am, levator function can be graded as good, fair, and poor. The good levator function is 10 to 15 mm of excursion. Fair is around 6 to 9 mm of excursion, and poor is less than 5 mm of excursion.
Okay. So poor means you'll have to supplement some other elevators, right? You cannot rely on
Retractors,
and there is no option now. Retracting it or strengthening the elevator will not work in this case, right? Because it's a very poor function and it is very severe also. How do you grade the severity of ptosis based upon the measurement?
Mild, moderate, severe. Mild is 2 to 3 mm of the drooping of the upper eyelid. Moderate is 3 to 5 mm drooping of upper eyelid, and severe is more than 5 mm drooping of the upper eyelid.
Right. So, what do you think will be an optimum surgical option for this child?
Ma'am, actually, since this child has a BPS syndrome, so I would like to do a stage correction. The first stage would be I would like to correct his epicanthus inversus by doing a Mustard's jumping man flap. And
one more thing. Sorry, we messed up one thing. Sorry. Coming back to the examination, this is a blepharophimosis syndrome, right? So what is he having? He's having a horizontally as well as vertically shortened palpebral aperture, right? Horizontally shortened and vertically shortened palpebral aperture, right? So one more, we left out those measurements. Well, can you tell me about the rule of 30? Because we have to do some manipulations of canthus also in this case, right?
Yes, ma'am. Rule of 30 is basically the width of the palpebral aperture is 30 mm normally on the right and left side, and the intercanthal distance is 30 mm. So 30, 30, 30, right, left, and intercanthal distance.
And what about the interpupillary distance?
Ma'am, interpupillary distance on an average approximately 60 millimeters.
That is double the intercanthal distance usually.
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
60. But in this child, did you do the measurements of the intercanthal and interpupillary distance? You didn't mention that in the examination, right? So how much is the horizontal? Yeah, or maybe I didn't hear.
I was not provided with that information, so I've just.
But in examination, it is,
sorry,
yeah. But in examination also, you can see that there is telecanthus.
Yes, ma'am.
Because you mentioned already that epicanthal fold is there, epicanthus inversus is there, and there is obviously a horizontally shortened palpebral aperture between the medial and lateral canthus. And the distance between the two medial canthi because of the epicanthic fold is obviously from the photograph also it is very long. It is not 30, 30, 30, right? It's not symmetric. So shouldn't you do, when you see the epicanthic fold, you should have done the measurements also. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
So intercanthal distance, whenever you get a blepharophimosis, because your treatment is going to include the canthal corrections also. It's not just vertical levator correction. You have to do the canthal corrections also. So it is a multiple procedure in which you're going to do in stages, like you said. So canthal measurements you missed out in the examination. So that should also be there.
Yeah.
Okay. So so include that also. And if I say that it is teleorbitism, will you agree? Or hypertelorism? Is it hypertelorism or telecanthus?
How do you differentiate, Ankita?
Ma'am, in hypertelorism, we'll have increase in inner canthal distance, increase in interpupillary distance, and increase in outer canthal distance. But in telecanthus, we have only increase in inner canthal distance. So this child doesn't fit into that hypertelorism.
So how will you measure? You have to see the medial orbital margin. You have to see the anterior lacrimal crest on either side and see the measurement of the soft tissues as well as the skeletal measurements by palpation, right? Then only you'll be able to differentiate. And I don't think in the rest of the face, the child is not having any dysmorphic features. So maybe we don't know. And you cannot say unless you do further investigations. So such patients will require radiological investigations to see if this condition is also present, right? Unless you do that, you'll not be able to commit whether this actual broadening is present, right?
Yes,
okay. One more thing,
yes,
in the exam, when you said about the blepharophimosis syndrome, is there any other association? One is a flat nasal bridge, which occurs.
Ma'am,
yes, that is there in this child.
Yes, ma'am. The child has a flat nasal
bridge.
And
another association of blepharophimosis syndrome is a short upper lip, short philtrum. Have you heard of that?
Ma'am, yes, I've heard of high arch palate and all that.
Yes, but it doesn't look so from the photographs, great. So maybe it is not there. But you cannot commit to the treatment before you say about the relevant investigations required also. So radiological assessment to see if it is actually a hypertelorism or a telecanthus, that should also be done in this case. Okay. So next, shall we come back to our surgical steps now? So how many stages do you want to proceed for this patient?
Ma'am, I have planned in 2 stages the management for this patient.
Okay.
The first stage, I would like to do the correction.
Only 2? Anything else? Because you're committed to blepharophimosis syndrome. Is it 2 stages or something more? Okay, just proceed. So what is your first stage?
The first stage is I would like to correct epicanthus inversus by doing a Mustardase jumping man flap. And then I would, at the same sitting, I would like to do the correction for telecanthus with the bilateral shortening and transnasal wiring of the medial palpebral ligament. If after conducting these 2 surgery, if the width of the palpebral fissure is still less, then I would like to do lateral canthotomy and canthoplasty.
Okay.
And once the scar is supple and soft and the wounds have settled down, after 6 months, I would like to do frontalis sling surgery for bilateral ptosis.
Okay, agreed. When you're doing your first step, the child, ideally, what is the age at which you would have liked to proceed with the first step of your surgery? What is the ideal age where you want to correct this?
Around 18 months is the age, basically, we try to do it.
18 months is needed, or?
The child is reported, or
is that?
Max by 3 to 5 years of age, we have to do that.
Because its assessment will be difficult. I would proceed at 3 to 5 years, the preschool age. What do you, Lakshmi ma'am and Ralakshan sir, what do you think? What do other faculty think about it? For
ideal would be 3 years, up to 3 years. Up to 3 years. Basically, that is the age. I mean, to a certain extent, the objective test which we want to elicit, also patient will be able to follow it. So up to 3 years. 3 years will be okay. 3 years.
Yeah, I think consensus would be around 3 to 5 years. I think that 3 years would be the better for assessment also. So now in this case, it is quite late. At 10 years, we are able to, or unless that ptosis is so severe that it is going to go into an amblyogenic situation, right? If it was like that, we would have proceeded earlier. But since the pupils are not covered, then I think the child is compensating with frontalis. Maybe we could wait for a little bit longer. But 10 years is quite late. Now you're going to do with the surgery first stage, but any warning which you want to give to the parents? What will happen after your first stage? Any changes which will happen to the child? You want to warn the parents? What will happen to the palpebral fissure and ptosis when you're doing a canthoplasty in this child? Will it improve or will it worsen? Width horizontally you're going to increase by pulling on either side, right? So what will happen to the vertical dimensions? Oh, there's a lot of disturbance, no? Somebody. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you hear?
They might.
Yes, what will happen to the ptosis?
We might have to warn them about the worsening of the ptosis.
Yes, obviously.
Ma'am, there might be worsening of the ptosis.
There will be worsening of the ptosis because you're going to pull the eyelid in the horizontal dimension. So that means the eyelid is going to come down. Already it is very severe ptosis. So this is going to get worsened in the initial surgery, right? So you have to warn the parents and the child also about this. Then in the second step, what are you going to do?
Ma'am, in the second sitting, we will be doing the correction for the bilateral ptosis.
Okay. So what options? There are so many options. What option do you want to do?
Since this child has a severe degree of ptosis with poor levator function, I would like to go with frontalis sling surgery.
Yes. So how will you proceed with the frontalis sling surgery? What material do you want to use? Or rather, what are the materials available?
I would use a silicone rod.
Why?
Ma'am, you can do the frontalis with the alloplastic and autologous material. Alloplastic material such as silicone rod or prolene or muslin mesh or Gore-Tex. And autologous can be with the palmaris longus tendon or facial arter temporalis fascia. Okay. I would like to use a silicone rod and a Crawford technique.
Okay, what is your proper technique? Can you describe the proper technique? How will you proceed with the incisions? And can you just briefly describe the operative steps? Where will you put the incision? How many methods are there? There are different methods for doing frontalis sling. Which method do you want to use?
Ma'am, there is Fox pentagon technique and then Crawford two triangle technique.
Okay.
Design can be rhomboid design or triangular design. So the named ones are Crawford and Fox pentagon. And
you want to do? I didn't hear you. With
Crawford technique, we draw two triangles. So the Crawford technique is the two triangular technique, and my incisions from the upper eyelid. I would be giving 3 incisions. So I would be dividing the upper eyelid into middle third, in thirds. So at the junction of the medial third would be my first incision, and at the junction of middle and lateral third would be my second incision. And the midpoint of this incision would be my third incision in the eyelid. And the brow incision would be in line with the medial canthus and lateral canthus.
Is it in line with the medial canthus or is it the medial canthus?
0.5 to it and 0.5 centimeter temporal to the in the line drawn from the medial and lateral canthus.
Okay, fine. So you're creating an isosceles triangle in the forehead then, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So how will you proceed? Where will you start? Suppose it's which should you want to do silicone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So silicone, which technique? Fox method or Crawford?
No, ma'am. Crawford.
Crawford. Okay. So where will you start and which all planes will you traverse when you want to do this? How will you pass the material?
So basically, I would. From the lateral aspect of my brow incision, which is 0.5 centimeter above the brow, I would pass my right needle, and in the eyelid, it will be in the suborbicularis plane. I would be tunneling in the suborbicularis plane to come out through the lateral incision in the lid.
Okay.
And then I would use my needle and I would draw 2 triangles as shown by my arrow. Okay. So then I would bring out to the central incision and come out to the lateral incision. The similar way, I would bring another silicone rod from the medial aspect of the incision from the brow to the eyelid in suborbicularis plane. And in the brow, the plane would be through the frontalis muscle. And then both the silicone rod, I would bring it in the central incision, which is approximately 2 centimeter above the brow level.
Yes.
And then there is something called as Watsky sleeve, which comes.
Yes.
So I will put the Watsky sleeve, and then I will tighten my silicone rod.
Okay. And then what will you do with the ends? Because the problem with an alloplastic material is that it can cause a granuloma in that area, right? So what will you do with the end? Which plane will you bury it?
Ma'am, it will be deeper to the frontalis. I would bury it just 2 mm above my.
Yeah. It will go up to the supraperiosteal plane, very deep to the frontalis, and we'll leave a long ends such that you'll be able to tighten your Watsky's sleeve in case of revision. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So
Ankita, show the figure.
Yes.
Display.
I'm already displayed the figure, ma'am.
We can't see the display.
Are you comfortable with the Watsky sleeve and all other things? With silicone rod?
No, that's her option, sir. I just wanted her to say her
Ankita,
choice.
What is commonly used? Of
The
course,
facial
a
atta.
lot of facial atta is used, temporal dysphasia is used, palmaris longus, all these things are used. Even autologous tissues can cause sometimes infection. But the silicone, personally, doesn't go well.
Because if the child needs any revision surgery in the future, that would be easy to make the adjustment. With the facial atta, because of the adhesions.
Yeah, understood. Adhesions, you cannot. But there are certain sutures also. Have you seen the thing which is brought out by Auro Labs, Arabindo Labs from?
Yes, sir. We use 3-0 proline, which is, and there are.
Which do you use? In your center, which do you use?
In our institution, we use 3-0 proline if we have the suture material. Can you hear me, sir?
Okay.
Yeah.
Clear.
Please. Go ahead.
I'll just share the screen one more time, so because I think
ideal would be to use a suture material rather than personally silicone. It doesn't integrate much well, and there are possibilities of granuloma and other things, especially in children. You can use a monofilament material.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Suppose
if you combine both surgeries, Ankita.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Suppose if you want to, if the levator function is good, what do you want to do?
I can do levator and advancement if the levator function is good.
Okay. Resection and Casanella, servet, and other things.
So Casanella, servet, if the ptosis is mild, it would be
mild. Yes.
So what is Casanella, servet?
Hello.
Voice is breaking.
Yeah, Ankita is preparing that. Yeah. Okay. Quick, you have another case also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sir.
One more short case is there.
Yeah, short case is there.
So can she say the treatment for mild, moderate like that? Mild,
moderate,
if we can make
she can put. Yeah. It's normally done as a tabular column wherein the levator function on one side and the ptosis on the other side. Then accordingly you decide 3 mm, 3 to 6. By that it is.
Ma'am, Ankita ma'am has some network issues. She'll be back.
Okay, no problem. The rest of you can answer. The final years can answer. Suppose it's a mild ptosis. What are the options? Very mild ptosis with good levator function. What will you do? Final years.
Ma'am, we can do Casanella servet operation. That is tarsoconjunctival mollarectomy.
Yes.
Even we can do levator plication. That is one of the options. And even levator resection and advancement can be another option.
Okay. So suppose it's a moderate ptosis with good levator function. Then what will you do?
Levator resection and advancement would be my option of management in them.
Aponeurotomy can be done for moderate ptosis. If it's a good levator function, will you do that?
Ma'am, that is most commonly preferred in involutional ptosis, where there is a descent of aponeurosis.
What do you do?
Aponeurosis requires
Aponeurosectomy. Okay.
And suppose then, about levator resection, Ankita, what are the approaches for this? There are two approaches for levator resection.
Ma'am, there is conjunctival approach and there is cutaneous approach.
Yes, Plastiquest and Bush, right? They started it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So suppose you are going, usually as plastic surgeons, we go for anterior approach, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So can you just briefly tell me step 1, 2, 3, what all will you do for levator resection? Where will you put the incision?
Ma'am, we will give a supratarsal skin crease incision if it is present, or in case of unilateral
fold. Okay. If there is supratarsal fold is not really apparent, what will you do in that case? Where will you put the incision?
Ma'am, with the contralateral normal, we can compare and put the incision at that level if there is no supratarsal crease.
Okay.
And
suppose it's bilateral. Suppose it's bilateral.
Someone with the same age and stature, and then we will compare with that normal person and we would plan our incision. But it has to be symmetrical in the bilateral. Whatever we
H-mesh control in this case, you know that tarsus is already there. Na? Usually we discuss that supratarsal fold is what causes the skin crease.
Yes.
If you know the tarsal height, then you'll be able to know, because 8 to 10 millimeters is the normal tarsal height in mid-pupillary line in an adult person. So if you know that, you can mark it, and it is curving to either side also. So that way you'll be able to mark it. We don't need a H-mesh control for this, because everybody's eye will be slightly different, right? Okay. So then that is your proposed supratarsal fold. You're artificially creating your fold there. Okay.
Yes,
so what will you incise and what will you expose? What all structures you're going to incise?
We'll incise the skin, we'll incise the orbicularis oculi, and then we'll use the orbital septum, which we'll incise, and then we'll find a pro-aponeurotic fat pad.
Where will you see the orbital septum?
Hello?
Where will you see the orbital septum?
Ma'am, just behind the orbicularis oculi.
Yes. At which level will you see? See, anterior lamella at the level of the tarsus, and anterior lamella above the level of tarsus has got different structure, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So anterior lamella is thin and orbicularis, and after that,
orbicularis oculi. After that,
in front of tarsus. Yes. So above the level of the tarsus, then only you see the orbital septum. And where is the orbital septum attached?
Ma'am, it is attached from the periosteum of the bone to the get inserted into the upper border of the tarsal plate.
Yes, from arcus marginalis to the levator.
Upper border.
To the upper border of the tarsus, right? So you divide the orbital septum, or will you retain and suture it back when you're doing a ptosis surgery? What is the importance of orbital septum? You'll divide it, okay?
Yes, ma'am. In our approach, we will incise it along the length of the
Yeah, then we'll not suture it back also. So after you incise the orbital septum, what will you see next? What is the next structure which you see?
Pre-aponeurotic fat pad.
Yes. So what will you do with the pre-aponeurotic
fat pad?
That
has to be retracted.
Retracted? Which direction?
Will retract them.
Upwards.
Laterally under the orbital rim. Like under the orbital rim, it has to be displayed.
So then what will you see?
Then we would see levator aponeurosis.
Yes.
And we will dissect inferiorly for the tarsal plate and superiorly for the levator muscle.
Okay. So at the upper part of the levator aponeurosis, before you start seeing the levator muscle, what structure will you see there? What condensations can you see? Facial condensations are there, na? 3 structures you can see there. These are the attachments
On
of the, yeah. What sling? Which sling is there? What ligament?
Wittnall's ligament.
Yeah, Wittnall's ligament is there, and to it are attached the medial and lateral horns of the levator also.
Aponeurosis. Yeah.
The Wittnall's is important because if some cases instead of frontalis sling, we'll be able to do the Wittnall sling also. This is surgery called Wittnall sling. Right? Intraocularly,
yes.
you'll be able to see. So when you're doing it with proper hemostasis, you'll be able to see all these structures. Okay, then what will you do after you've discovered the aponeurosis, you've seen the levator, then what will you do? What's the next step?
I'll go like anterior border of the tarsal plate, I'll make a buttonhole and I'll lift the levator aponeurosis.
Very carefully.
And then I will dissect it. And I have to, I can do a hydro dissection and I'll separate the levator from the Muller's muscle on the undersurface.
Okay, so under the Muller's muscle will come what?
Conjunctiva.
Yes, so you should
the
not
palpebral
conjunctiva. Palpebral conjunctiva, yeah. Okay, and then it is going up the Muller's muscle, will be going to the superior fornix also. So you create a plane above and below the levator. Then what will you do?
Ma'am, then if we are doing it in adult, we know the amount of resection we have planned, or and even in the sitting position, after doing all this dissection in the supine position, we can make the patient sit and we can put a temporary stitches to see whether our resection plan is adequate or not, and the ptosis correction is adequate or not. And once, like, we'll take a temporary stitches with a double arm sutures and on the anterior border, 3 to 4 mm below the upper border of the tarsal plate and to the levator, to the amount we are planning to resect. And then we'll check for the correction. And if it is adequate, then we'll go ahead with our procedure.
Okay. So is it always like that you decide the amount of your resection perioperatively on the table, or is there any other method?
No, ma'am. Even pre-operatively, we can plan based on the levator excursion. Whether
what do you call that? There are name techniques for this, no? What you mentioned was the Berkey technique. Intraoperatively, you're deciding by sitting up and then seeing the taking the bites and seeing the plications, then deciding upon the amount of resection. There's another technique where you calculate on the basis of your MRD1 itself. So what do you call that?
Beard technique.
So how do you decide in beard technique? So, the other one is Berkey technique. Apart from that, there is one more technique called that's an approximation by Rycroft, right? Rycroft, for every millimeter of ptosis, you resect 4 millimeters of levator. But that is roughly approximation, and usually we follow either the other beard or the Berkey, and usually we have to, even if you are having an arbitrary idea preoperatively, we'll have to see intraoperatively. Okay, so in beard technique, how do you do? How much do you have?
It is based on the MRD1, like based on the marginal reflex distance, and it can be like small amount of resection, moderate, large, or maximal.
Also,
like
for the is also there.
Yes, ma'am, more than 23 mm.
Yes, supramaximal is 27 to 30 mm. Near total resection is being done. Okay. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So you have to see, and I think we are running short of time. So you have to remember all these things, how much amount of levator resection is required and all. And one more thing, where do you leave the height? Because you are already infiltrating, and you know that the Muller's muscle is going to be acting. So
we will want to do over correction, because since if we are doing it under local, lignogen is known to cause paralysis of orbicularis oculi, so there will be drooping of the upper eyelid more, and there will be even epinephrine causes the activation of the Muller's. So basically, we have to do overcorrection by 1 to 2 mm from the proposed plan.
Yes. How much does Muller's contribute to elevation of eyelid?
1 to 2 mm of the upper lid retraction.
How much does frontalis contribute to elevation of eyelid?
2 to 3 mm.
Yes, okay. And suppose levator function, is it important when you're deciding where to leave your eyelid correction? Is it any way connected to it? Suppose you're having a levator function of less than 7 mm, you usually overcorrect it by 1 to 1.5 mm. Okay. And if it is
Yes,
the levator function is more than 10 mm, then you can undercorrect it actually, because levator will compensate once the patient is once the healing mechanism is starting. So that also is there.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Sir and madam, is there anything to add to it?
Why you don't combine? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Especially combination of what you have done as staged procedures is always better. This kind of congenital ptosis.
Yes.
When you plan together, 2 stages together, may have a lot of issues, including possible amblyopia and all those things. So it's better to stage the surgeries, this kind of congenital ptosis. And only an additional point is congenital ptosis sometimes can be genetic.
Yes.
There are certain genes which have been found recently, and FOX2 and all those, so many genes are, I mean, especially when you said syndromic ptosis, no, all these things should be taken care.
Yes.
And apart from that, you should examine the oral cavity also to look for a palate. In certain syndromic cases, there may be a palate, cleft palate also, micronathia and all those things. All these things should be looked for in the examination. Okay. Otherwise, it's a good presentation, Ankita.
Yes, sir.
Madam, can we move it to
in teenage? One more thing
Yeah.
is there. You said about 2 stages only. One more stage can come later on. They can have a lateral canthal ectropia, right? So in their teenage, you'll have to follow them up, and maybe they'll require a canthal correction and a full thickness skin graft. That is also described for blepharophimosis syndrome. Okay,
Can we?
nice presentation. Very nice.
Can